This is Lydia Camarillo. She is president of the Southwest Voter Registration and Education Project and the William C. Velasquez Institute. And it's quite a mouthful, but it means so much. And I'm so glad you're with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here.
We have so much to talk about in terms of voting, education, and the future of democracy. Mm-hmm. And I want to start with some history because Willie Velasquez is a legend, but he's also probably unknown to newer generations of people, especially outside of the Mexican-American population and definitely the larger Latino population. He founded Southwest Voter Registration and Education Project here in San Antonio. You can give us some history there. Talk about Willie Velasquez, especially for those that don't know how influential he was in the Southwest voter organization, but also nationally, statewide, and locally on voting.
Willie Velasquez was a giant of his time. He understood the future before we knew what the future would be like. It's important we put it in context. It was 1968 when a group of Latino leaders, mostly lawyers that were members of LULAC, were having a discourse about the discrimination and the presence or lack of presence of Latinos in America. As part of that discourse, they decided that they were going to start the Mexican-American Legal Defense Fund, MALDEF, and modeled after the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Willie was part of that conversation, that discussion, and he felt, not being a lawyer, being a young person, he was in his early 20s, he thought that he could start the Southwest Voter Registration and Education Project, modeled after the NAACP Voter Fund. That's how it began. So in 1968, MALDEF was started. It took Willie 6 years to incorporate it into a 501c3 because the Nixon administration was blacklisting him and blocking him from registering Mexican Americans to vote. That's how it all began. But it started with Willie having a folding table, a folding chair, a rotary phone, a phone book, and he would go down the line calling one by one men and women, Latinos in San Antonio, asking them if they were registered to vote, and if they weren't, could he make an appointment to come and register them in the evening? And he did that for a very long time. We're now 48 years old. In 2024, we're going to celebrate 50 years of existence. Willie started what I would think an organization that wasn't fighting for us to vote, but instead was fighting for our democracy and our right for our existence. He was fighting so that we would have dignity and respect, whether we were documented or not, whether we were native born or not. That's Willie's legacy. It also, from the organizational functional point of view, Willie started registration projects. Then he realized no matter how many folks we registered to vote, how many Latinos we registered to vote, case in point, in one of the Senate races, he realized Latinos are never going to elect one of their own as long as districts are drawn at large. And that's when he began having a conversation with MALDEF and asking them, in fact, at the time it was Joaquin Avila, and asked, can we start dividing up the state and separating and dividing, changing systems from at-large to single-member district. So that's the second part of his legacy, is registering, empowering, and then changing systems from at-large to single-member districts so the Latinos would have a voice. And so since we opened our doors, we have registered over 3 million Latinos. We have trained 150,000 Latino leaders, and we have won 210 voting rights lawsuits. We have several lawsuits that are currently pending. One of them is the Texas redistricting. We sued on all 4 maps. In the last cycle in 2011, we sued in two, the State House and the Congress. This time we sued for the Congressional, the State Senate, the State House, and the State Board of Education. In essence, we believe that given the seats that the state of Texas weakened, made them not strong enough that Latinos could elect a candidate of choice, and the districts that we proposed that could be drawn given the population growth in the last cycle and this cycle, we are basically losing 15 districts where Latinos could elect a candidate of choice. That's ridiculous. There's some states that don't even have 2 districts. Talk about 15 districts that were stolen. So that's part of what we're doing. The other one is Senate Bill 1, which is a whole lot of bills that have been passed and enacted by the state of Texas, basically creating a system where Latinos can never register to vote in the way that they should, and are creating barriers so that we don't turn out to vote. The most recent one, SB 1, allows for partisans to step into the booth where you're voting and stand de nariz a nariz, nose to nose, stopping you from voting and checking out to see what you're doing. You and I, Elaine, would stop the person and even tell him, basta, muévete de aquí, leave me alone.
Yep. But we would dismiss them, but there are voters that would not, that wouldn't be sure if their voting rights are secured.
Correct. And they would be embarrassed, or they would be ashamed, or they would just walk out, or they would not bother to show up. So that's part of the problem. The other thing is that they're taking away the opportunity for us to provide assistors. That is to say, if I speak only Spanish, I don't read well because I can't see well anymore, we used to be able to walk in and help the voter with the language issues, with sight issues, with anything that they need, including interpreting the law, the whatever they were voting for, as long as you weren't giving any judgment on what you were voting for. That is no longer allowed. So we're suing on that. In the last cycles, we also sued the census, the federal government, because they didn't want us to be counted. So we have a long history of protecting democracy and protecting the vote. And that's who we are. I mean, why do we stand here today still? I think when Willie opened the organization, Southwest Voter, his vision was that someday we would all be treated with respect and dignity. We are not there yet. I do not know if we'll be able to accomplish that in my children's generation or their children's generation. There is far too much racism right now in America. There is fascism in America. And there are orchestrated, organized, funded efforts to stop us from voting.
Well, that is a great introduction if I've ever heard one. How long have you been with Southwest Voter? Tell us a little bit about your story.
I've been with Southwest Voter. I've had the honor to work for Southwest Voter for about 26 years. I was working with Maldiv when Antonio Gonzalez, the third president of Southwest Voter, asked me if I would join Southwest Voter, and I moved to San Antonio, and it's been an honor. Unfortunately, we lost Antonio in November of 11th in 2018, and then I became...
What a shock.
He had cancer, and he fought. He did his best to fight it. He was a fighter. All the way to the end, he fought to survive and to live. He was living for his wife and his children and for the work that we're doing. Unfortunately, cancer beat him. Mm-hmm. And so we lost him. And so that's when I became the president. But I would have been here no matter what, because I believe that what we're doing and what we do at Southwest Voter is a call of justice. It's a call of making sure that when I say that we're looking for an opportunity to have respect and dignity, I mean it. There are so many people in our community that is not treated well. We know at the Supreme Court level, we women here in Texas, whether you believed in Roe versus Wade or not, we're still women, and we want to be able to control our own bodies. Even to say, if you're pro-life, I'm pro-life. But I think the question for us now is that the Supreme Court also says that they want to dismantle other laws, reverse other Supreme Court rulings, including Plyler versus Doe. Plyler versus Doe is a case that was put forth by Maldev and Vilma Martinez and her team that gave the right to every child who was undocumented to be given the right to be educated in America in public schools. That's a disaster if we let it happen. And so that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for people to have an opportunity to fulfill their true dreams in America as America promised us. And it's a big thing. It's not a simple thing. America, particularly America, as we are fighting some horrible situations today, is not a perfect union. We have a lot of work to do. But we as Latinos are going to be a very important part of that fabric, and we're going to create it in such a way that our children can be proud of their parents and their grandparents and those of us that are here to make a difference.
You talked earlier about all the obstacles before the voter just to get to the ballot box. It includes voter ID laws for sure, which are now a requirement everywhere, which too many people still see as non-obstacles. Talk about that and about all the new and ingenious, and I mean that sarcastically, the ingenious ways that some states like Texas are using to dissuade voters, especially certain voters, from exercising their rights.
When the state legislature passed the Texas voter ID, very few states had enacted such laws. This is before the United States Supreme Court ruling Shelby versus Alabama. What's important about that is that before the Shelby ruling, we had what was called, as part of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, which allowed us to ask the Department of Justice, the United States Justice Department, to come and determine whether or not the changes in anything having to do with elections were done in a way that would not violate the voting rights and the United States Constitution of voters.
It was called pre-clearance.
It was called exactly pre-clearance, Section 5. What the court said in Shelby was, because we now have a president that's African American, we must no longer have discrimination. And therefore, if there is still discrimination, Congress must redetermine which jurisdictions, states, communities, counties, cities, states still discriminate. And they must pass that, which is what we're trying to make sure we pass at the federal level, the John Lewis, it's called after the Congressman John Lewis, which, by the way, Willie Velazquez got trained and mentored by John Lewis on how to register voters.
I didn't know that. That's fabulous.
That's part of the history. Well, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act would allow us to have back the jurisdictions that would determine that Texas, Alabama, and other states still discriminate, including some jurisdictions in California and New York and Chicago that are considered more progressive. And then we would also then have Section 5, which is the pre-clearance. The pre-clearance was from simple things like, why are we dropping some ballots? Why aren't ballots in our languages? Why are we closing voting hours? Why are we closing voting sites? To the redistricting process and the voter ID. At that time, the courts, the D.C. court, the federal D.C. court determined, as our claim was, that it violated our rights. And we won that victory, but very shortly Shelby happened and it was declared. And therefore, we now have voter ID, and most of the states have voter ID. Why is that a problem? And why are some folks arguing it's like a banking thing? You do right. Banking, you go.
I hear from readers all the time that everyone has or should have a state recognized picture ID that should be a formality. Everyone should have it.
When we argued that the voter ID would prohibit voters who have the right to vote from voting, we knew that it would impact the African American and the Latino community. But to our surprise, we found a lot of elder white nuns, who, because of their dedication and their calling to become nuns, didn't have the correct documentation to prove they were in fact American citizens and could not get an ID and were prohibited from voting. So I bring and I remind us that it was white elder women who were prohibited from voting with a voter ID. But that was the same case for Latinos and Blacks who might not have the documentation, who might have been, at the time when they were born in their casas and they didn't have the perfect certificates because the midwives and all of them didn't give them the right paperwork that they then had to take. There was a lot of cases like that. It's unfortunate, but it's true. There are many people in America that don't have the right documentation to prove who they are in order to get a birth certificate, which they then need to get the voter ID.
And I will remind our listeners that when we at the paper do stories about the homeless, we quickly surmise that one of their most important obstacles, one of their chief obstacles they face is they don't have an ID, mostly because they don't have a place to live, or they've been thrown out of where they were living. Their belongings are often destroyed, lost, and it takes some money and time and transportation to get all of those replaced. So various organizations that assist the homeless, like one not too far from here, Christian Assistance Ministries, they're just down the street here. And every day a week, if you go to their lobby where they're helping people and taking them, they take a number and they sit down and then they're helped for whatever question they want. And one of the first things is, I need help getting my ID. People who have been jailed for even a short amount of time often are released and they don't have all their documents going in, or their documents aren't taken care of when they're there and they come out and they have no ID. And everywhere they go, even to Catholic charities, they need an ID.
The thing we discovered is that they were also not going to have many sites where the rural communities could drive to. And driving, especially in today's time, the gas is so expensive. So, but even in those times where the gas wasn't costing as much as it has been in this time, it was prohibitive for many folks, as well as the cost to get a copy of a birth certificate. I don't know how much it costs now, but I know that it's been as much as $35 plus, but you add $35 plus if you work and you have to take the day off to go do this, plus if you drive and it's 50 to 100 miles away. And
if you don't drive, you have to get somebody to drive you and you need to help pay for that exercise. There's so many barriers.
The bus, the childcare, all those expenses are what we called hidden,
the poll tax.
It's a hidden poll tax. Thank you so very much. I think that what we need to remember is that if we are truly going to be a leader in democracy, and when I say we, I mean America is a leader in democracy and claims to be the leader in democracy when other countries are not fulfilling the right for people to have democracies at the way that they should, then we should be the example of making sure that everybody has the right to vote, and those who have the right to vote, the process is made much easier at the registration level as well as the vote level, and ultimately that their vote is counted. We have to worry in America that any election, this is true when in 2000 when Gore lost and we knew and learned about the chats, and he lost by less than 600 votes because of the Florida electoral votes, ultimately ended up 600 votes. But we learned...
I'll always have a big question mark on that election.
It is a question mark, and I think there were some mistakes made by the Gore campaign, but at the end of the day, I think everybody will argue what Trump argues is that the election was lost with Gore, but not with Trump. Mm-hmm. But what I was also trying to bring to light is the fact that I learned around that time that I didn't realize this. just because you vote doesn't mean your vote will be counted. And in every presidential election, at least 1 million votes are not counted. 1 million votes.
Yes.
That's
a lot.
That's a tragedy.
But it happens all the time. I mean, even local elections officials will say, what we have here is an estimation. And the estimation is usually very sound, and it wouldn't have changed the elections. But if you count all of the maybe sort of, this one came in late, we didn't count these in the end. It's always a promise. It's always the promise that all of them will be counted.
What's sad is
but not to the extent that former President Trump says.
Yeah, but I mean, let's put aside Trump for a second. 1 million votes is 1 million votes. And I'm not talking about provisional ballots. I'm talking about people that go in, do what they're supposed to do, and something happens and their vote is not counted. That is unacceptable in America. Mm-hmm. If the bank knows how much money we have to the penny,
yes,
and they will take our money to the penny, it's same with the IRS. There's no excuse that we can't count every
and
vote.
They're rarely wrong.
And so I think what I'm suggesting is that in America, if we want to be the leaders about democracy, and democracy in America is in crisis, we have to fight to perfect it so that we truly are a leader.
I wanted, in that question, I wanted also to mention that I was really just so impressed with the ways in which so many jurisdictions decided to help voters during the pandemic. It was inspiring. I specifically look to Houston, Harris County, where the county judge there found all these ways, 24/7 voting places where you could drive up at 2 a.m. if that was the best time for you and get it out of the way and not face a line, or drive-by sort of voting, or having so many places where you can drop off a ballot and know that it's secure, that it will be the possession of the county, that they will be counted. I know this is a dream, but I just think that in generations from now, they'll read about how we vote and say, God, I can vote on my phone till the very last minute or first thing I just think that where we are now is so prehistoric in terms of how we will someday. Are you hopeful in that way too?
Well, I'm always hopeful. I've always see the world in the glass is half full. So even when I feel that 15 districts were stolen, and I use the word very stolen, and we filed a lawsuit and we sued, and we believe hopefully we will win, that we still have to organize and register and beat the situation, if not in court, on the ground fighting for that. I think that people will look in 100 years, 50 years, maybe even 20 years to say that we vote in a way that is contrary to wisdom. Because, as you said, if you are a citizen, you should be given the right to vote without worrying about it. You should vote like in most states where you can vote, register to vote on the same day and then go vote.
As you do in Boston, Massachusetts.
In California, in California, as soon as the pandemic hit, their first question was, how do we make sure that people are safe and secure and do not catch the virus, while at the same time have the opportunity to exercise their right to vote and vote in the elections. So what did they do? They automatically sent every registered voter a ballot. They haven't stopped that. That's what they're doing. And in Texas,
seems to me pretty simple if you really want people to vote.
It's very simple, and that's why I think we have to give Judge Lina Hidalgo a lot of credit, because she was thinking, given the law, what can I do to facilitate the process? And that's why she did the 24 hours. And we saw anywhere from 10 to 30,000 people voting, because some people cannot vote because they're working all the way to the end. It's not that they're being lazy. It's that the time given their daily barriers, obligations. Don't let them do that.
Demands every freaking day.
The children, they're in school, they're working, whatever. But she did some incredible stuff that immediately in the following legislation, the Texas legislation prohibited those kinds of things.
Right away.
Right away.
They were too successful.
They were too successful. The other thing that they did is they sued when folks tried to ask for the pandemic when you have when your system is immune and you're worried about the pandemic and you wanted to vote with the vote by mail, but you weren't 65 years old, they sued and they won where it's not allowed. So if you're someone who has cancer or diabetes in a way that it's very serious, because I know some people think diabetes is nothing that serious when in fact it is, you're not allowed to do that. You have to be 65 and over. Other states are sending the ballots at home and there are no problems. There are no issues. There's no such thing as fraud. In this state, when the back to the voter ID passed, they spent over $1 million, the state of Texas, to prove that there was fraud and they found nothing. People that are, I can speak wholeheartedly about where the Latino communities, because not only am I a Latina, but I work with the Latino community in getting them engaged and registered and participate in America's democracy. And I can tell you that people always tell us, no puedo porque no soy ciudadana. I can't register because I'm not a citizen, or I can't register because I've committed a felony and I'm dealing with that right now. And then we remind those who are going through the legal process of completing their the whatever they were charged with. Once you are told that you've completed everything, you have the right to go back to vote. And to the citizens, or rather the non-citizens, we remind them that if they become, if they're able to naturalize, eventually they will able to vote. And that's a piece that we're always working. But people know that if you're not a citizen, you can't vote, and no one wants to put their family at stake of being deported. So they're not going to break any laws. Texas, however, did, and they're doing it again, did argue that 100,000 men and women who became naturalized citizens along the way, but got their driver's license, then became naturalized citizens, then registered and voted, that they had no right to vote. We, of course, sued, and we were able to demonstrate that all these folks were, in fact, legal citizens, naturalized citizens who had the right to vote. And we demanded that the state send an apology and not ask them to re-register because they were legitimately and correctly registered. We're fighting that again. And in fact, the Secretary of State had to resign as a result of our efforts. And so we'll continue to fight for democracy. But you're right. My hope is that someday we can, kind of like one of those Star Wars movies where we are doing things and transforming into other worlds and other places. There will be a time as the Latino population continues to grow and understands the barriers that are placed on us, that we will dismantle them and create a system where we will easily register to vote, and that every vote will be counted and not 1 million of them are lost forever.
That's right. And it'll be assurance for everyone that all their votes are counted. Okay, let's talk a little bit about voting trends. I'm always fascinated with voting trends in general, what people see after an election, and especially trends among Latino voters. So tell us about that. Considering the last couple of cycles, what are we doing? How are we doing? Do you see some places where we've improved, and perhaps some places where we need to rededicate ourselves?
I'm very proud to tell you that we have seen a dramatic increase in voter registration in Texas that I haven't seen since I've worked doing this kind of work for, like I said, 25.
Since the last cycle?
Since the last cycle, but in the last 25 years, I have seen Texas stagnate at 2.6 million registered Latino voters, 2.7, 2.8, 2.6, 2.7, because people die, people move. Mm-hmm. And the work that we do didn't seem to do any real big dent. And then the new numbers come out this year, and we discover that from 2018, there were 2.8 million registered Latino voters. I'm only talking about Texas.
Only Texas, okay.
And today there are 3.7 million registered Latino voters in Texas, which means that we grew from 2018 to 2016 by almost 800,000 votes and another 200 from this cycle, which means, and we're not done. Yesterday was the last day to register to vote. Mm-hmm. So we'll have to get a better feel for if we grew any further. But I think there's three factors. One is the Trump factor. 2018 was the second year that Trump was president, and they began to see all the things that he was doing to destroy America and the fascism that was involved in his conversation and actions.
The white supremacy movement.
The white supremacy.
Which came out of hiding. It's always been there, but came out in full force.
So people were very, very afraid and very scared, and so I call it the Trump factor. The second thing is I think that Latinos are tired. They have witnessed California and Arizona and other states get out of the ashes and surface in a way that they're pushing legislation because Latinos are voting and they're electing candidates of their choice, which promotes their self-interest. The third, I think, is not only the work that we do, but the work that other groups do in Texas. And finally, Texas is now a competitive state. We've been saying that once Texas would be a competitive state, more resources would be spent to register voters and mobilize voters. I'm always told, why do you just register voters? And I remind them, if I have enough resources, I'm going to do both. If I have enough resources, I'm going to turn out high propensity voters, which is hopefully everybody in this room. There's
high propensity is the ones that our candidates want to get to.
Right. And then there's low propensity voters. And then there's new voters that registered in that cycle or will be voting for the first time in that cycle. New voters vote at a higher rate than low propensity voters. Low propensity voters require more work, more engagement, more resources. High propensity voters, we just need to be reminded, go out and vote. And perfect voters, we know that we must go vote. Porque si no,
we help others
we're
vote.
Around Halloween time, si no llega la Llorona.
Sí. La Llorona. Now, when you mentioned how many more Latinos are registered to vote in Texas, how many of those are brand new voters? I mean, kids who turned 18?
1 million are new. 1 million more people have registered. But here's the interesting thing. It is not 18 and 19-year-olds only. It's people our age who see and saw, that's again the Trump factor.
Oh, wow. So they're new voters, but they could be in their 40s, 50s, or whatever.
Correct.
Wow.
So that was a surprise for me too, because, we always figure that it's basically young folks who need to be engaged. But for a Southwest voter, we have been contacting since 2019, 1,000 high schools every year to register voters. And we are doing that. We did that in 2019.
And is that throughout the state or in South Texas? Where are you located?
It's throughout the state.
Okay.
Targeting areas where we think it's important, both urban and rural. Mm-hmm. And it includes South Texas, but it includes, of course, Bexar County, but it includes Dallas and Fort Worth and Harris County and El Paso and those states. And we've been doing that in 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. We did that also with the community colleges, and we have a competition, which as of this minute, I don't know who won or who lost because we haven't yet done that assessment. The committee is going to do it. But our goal, I think, is to turn out voters and work with voters and engage communities. But the Trump factor was a big factor. And so I think we are expecting 1 million more people will vote compared to 2018 in 2022. But the thing that people forget is that we think about 2.9 million Latinos will cast their vote, and we believe 1.3 million African Americans will vote, and about 450,000 Asians will vote. But there's going to be about 6.7 million white voters that will vote. And so, and not all.
They're in the majority in terms of voters.
They're in the majority in terms of voters for several reasons. The Latino community is now the majority population. When the redistricting factor, when we were doing redistricting and we were counting, there were 39.8% of the population was white, and 39.8 was white, and 39.4 was Latino. However, we believe there was an undercount, and we're not going to deal with that issue today. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that today, 40% of the population is Latino, and the white community still stays the same at 39. So we are now the official largest population in Texas. Latinos make up the largest population.
Though probably a greater number of those are young and still not able to vote.
Well, that's what I was about to say. Yeah. Thank you, Elaine. That's exactly the point. There is 1/3 of our population are children or underage, under 18. 1/3 of our population are not citizens. That doesn't mean they're here undocumented, but they're not citizens. They may have the green card, but they don't have, they're not naturalized. So we have a lot of work to do. But we are now officially the population, and we must act like the majority and demand that we are respected with the majority. And back to redistricting, while the population is 39.8% white, they control 60% of the districts.
Yes.
So a lot of work ahead of us.
Okay. I wanted to ask about voter apathy. You know, that is such the term that is used for voters who are registered, voters versus voters who come out and actually cast a ballot. How do you explain it?
First of all, I do not believe that Latinos have apathy. If they do not vote, they have a reason. One of them is, why bother to vote if my vote is going to be wasted because it's not fully counted? Clear case on point is a redistricting. In District 15, which is one of the Valley ones that was weakened, it means that they were drawn originally as Latino majority seats where Latinos would elect a candidate of choice. Now, that is no longer the case. So if you're an astute a voter and you know, I'm going to get everybody to vote, I'm going to get everybody to register to vote, but we're going to still lose because there's not enough of us
in that district.
Why bother?
Yes.
So that's one scenario. The second scenario is that sometimes we're not contacted. We don't even know there's an election. And why are we expecting Latinos turn out to vote at the same level that other voters are when there's no investment? Case on point. When President Obama ran the second time around, he wasn't even in a true competitive election. Yet he spent $6 billion in his campaign. Romney spent $6 billion. They're both sides, the Republican Party over here, the DNC, the RNC, the DNCC, the DCCC,
it's DCCC, I think.
DCCC, the DSCC, and the environment and labor on this side, and the Koch brothers on this side, and corporations on the other side. They each spent another $6 billion.
Yes.
That's $12 billion spent in
activating voters that are
8 competitive districts. And yet in those districts, you did not see a large expansion of voters that registered to vote, nor did you see more than 75% of the voters to turn out to vote. So why are we expecting Latinos to turn out to vote if we're not investing in them, except for the little work that Southwest Voters does that is never enough because the state is huge.
The state is huge. Yeah. Okay. One last one, and it's oh God, it's what keeps me up at night.
Okay.
We saw in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol building a real-time attack on democracy. Connect that threat to voting rights.
Well, the essence of January 6th is when I refer to we're in a crisis in democracy. The fact that we have deniers that believe that the election was stolen and that Trump should have won, The fact that they took over a building, and if you and I had gone in there, because estamos morenitas, they would have shot us before we even made it past a certain line.
Never would have made it.
Never would have made it. African American, tampoco. Asians, tampoco. But the fact that they were
The
able
Black
to...
Lives Matter movement, had they had a protest, that would have been a massacre.
Everybody would have been killed or put in jail or something. But the point is that January 6th is something we should all be afraid of and concerned and work against it happening again. It basically means that we have people who think that because Latinos and Blacks aren't deciding the elections, because in the last election, we can prove that Georgia and Arizona and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Latinos helped to take those elections towards the electoral votes going to the Democratic candidate. They're trying to stop us from voting. There is, as I said, an organized effort to stop us, whether it's at the state level with the various laws or whether it's January 6th. January 6th is an example of people who hate Latinos and Blacks, and they want to stop us from taking over. And when I say taking over, I'm not referring to the kind of discrimination that we have felt. I'm talking about we're growing, we're the population, and they're going to lose their election. They're going to lose their seats by the very essence of the demography growing. But it's not going to happen by itself. We have to register folks, we have to organize them, and we have to make sure that we invest in them so that they turn out to vote. Democracy is only as strong as its weakest link, and we have a lot of work to do.
We have a lot of very weak links in democracy, and we're so young at it yet. Thank you so much for joining us, Lydia.
It's a pleasure.
It's always great and terrible to talk with you.
No. Remember, 1 million more Latinos in Texas.
I'm going to go back to the very beginning and listen to that over and over in a loop so I feel better about what's going on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.